Have you ever noticed that often, the moment that should bring the most security is precisely when something starts to go off track, silently? When someone reaches 250K, what is expected is relief, stability, a sense of accomplishment. And in fact, that happens. The tension decreases, the fear diminishes, the heart rate slows down. But it is precisely then that something changes inside, almost imperceptibly, and few people talk about it. Have you ever experienced this? For a long time, wealth building is driven by internal noise, pressure to grow, urgency to succeed, anxiety to get out of the red, out of financial hardship, out of instability. Every decision carries emotional weight. Every mistake hurts. Every advance brings a mix of relief and warning. But when wealth reaches a certain level, and 250K is usually that psychological dividing line, the noise begins to disappear. The mind enters a different state, calmer, more confident, more comfortable. It feels like financial maturity. It feels like progress. It feels like finally, now everything is under control. And it is precisely this feeling that needs to be observed carefully. Because when the sound of scarcity fades, it doesn't leave a neutral void. It opens space for something new, invisible, subtle, a kind of silence that didn't exist before. A silence that changes the way you think about money, risk, decisions, and even yourself. Urgency no longer pushes, fear no longer protects, attention relaxes, and all this happens without any dramatic events, without visible losses, without glaring mistakes. This is where many people confuse calmness with security, comfort with control, stability with mastering the game. A person looks at their assets, looks back, compares them to where they started, and thinks, I've made it this far. I know what I'm doing. And perhaps they do. But the problem isn't what they know. It's what they fail to perceive when their mind enters this new psychological state. In the world of wealth building, there's a phase where risks don't shout. They whisper. They don't appear as crises, but as postponed decisions. They don't emerge as losses, but as ignored opportunities. They don't manifest as obvious mistakes, but as an excessively constant tranquility. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you, especially if you've already reached or are approaching this level. There's a reason why so many people get stuck after 250K. It's not a lack of intelligence, information, or discipline. It's an internal, almost imperceptible change that happens when the game stops being about survival and becomes about permanence, when the mind lowers its guard too soon. And it's precisely about this silence after victory that we need to talk about before moving on to the next level. And perhaps, as you listen to this, something is already falling into place inside you. Maybe you felt this change without ever putting it into words. That phase where you no longer feel pressured, no longer feel the same butterflies in your stomach, no longer wake up thinking about growing up with the same intensity. Everything seems lighter, more stable, more normal. And that's exactly why this conversation matters so much. Because it's not about numbers, it's about awareness. And awareness is only built when we stop, observe, and share experiences. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has resonated with you the most so far. Have you felt calmer after reaching a certain financial level? Or have you noticed that you've started to relax in decisions that previously required more attention? Sometimes, writing this down helps you see things more clearly. And when you comment, you're not just talking to me. You're talking to other people who are at exactly the same point on their journey, trying to understand what has changed inside. If this content is truly making you reflect, liking the video is a simple way to say, this is important. This helps the channel continue bringing this type of conversation to more people who are also building wealth and trying not to get lost in the process. And if you feel that this type of reflection is lacking in the world of personal finance, subscribing to the channel is a way to walk alongside us from here on out, because this journey doesn't end here, it just levels up. Now with that in mind, let's move on a little further, because after the calm arrives, the game changes in a way that almost no one warns you about. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because when someone crosses the 250K mark, the most relevant change doesn't happen in their bank account, but in their mindset. Up to that point, almost all decisions are driven by effort. There's a constant feeling of building, of pushing one's life forward, of proving something to others and to oneself. Money still represents movement, escape, achievement. But after this milestone, something subtle begins to happen. The focus shifts. The mind, which was previously oriented towards growth, becomes oriented towards preservation. And that changes everything. The human brain naturally seeks comfort. When financial survival ceases to be a daily threat, it enters a mode of emotional stabilization. Decisions begin to be filtered not by their potential impact, but by the sense of security they offer. The pace slows down. The appetite for risk decreases. And, without realizing it, the person begins to confuse tranquility with progress. It seems logical to protect what has been built, to avoid abrupt movements, to keep everything in its place. But it is precisely there that the mindset begins to transform, not into something worse, but into something more dangerous. Because this phase isn't about money, it's about identity. The person stops seeing themselves as someone who is building and starts seeing themselves as someone who has already arrived. Even if rationally they know there's still a long way to go, emotionally they change their position. Their internal dialogue alters. Decisions take on a different tone. The same urgency to learn, question, and adjust no longer exists. A silent feeling of mastering the game emerges, as if the main journey has already been won. And that's how false certainties are born. The idea that what brought me here will continue to work. The conviction that now I know how to avoid mistakes. The impression that I don't need to look so closely anymore. These beliefs don't appear as explicit arrogance, but as small daily choices. A decision postponed here, an opportunity ignored there, an annoyance that is pushed aside because everything seems relatively stable. The impact of this is not immediate. It accumulates behind the scenes, silently, while the person believes they are simply being more mature. This is a hidden truth of the financial journey. The more comfortable you feel, the fewer internal alarms go off. This discomfort that once served as a driving force and protection disappears, and without it, attention needs to be consciously cultivated. Otherwise, the path ceases to be guided by intention and becomes guided by inertia. Not because the person has become careless, but because the new mental state creates the illusion that everything is under control. And it is precisely at this point that the game truly changes. Not for those who are still struggling to reach it, but for those who have already crossed that invisible line and need to learn to operate at a different level of consciousness, where decisions are no longer driven by pain, but demand deliberate clarity. It is here that the transformation ceases to be external and becomes internal, affecting rhythm, choices, and vision of the future in ways that almost no one notices at the beginning. If you felt this describes something you've experienced or are experiencing now, comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is where the most invisible trap of this entire journey lies. The real danger isn't in a big fall, a glaring mistake, or an impulsive decision that destroys everything at once. The true danger begins when the pain disappears, when there is no more urgency, when nothing seems wrong. It is at this point that calm ceases to be an ally and becomes anesthesia. Pain has always had a clear function in the building process. It tightened, bothered, forced. Adjustments. It made you revise decisions, seek information, question old choices. But when wealth reaches a level that brings emotional comfort, this pain disappears, and with it, vigilance. The mind relaxes not only the body, but also attention. Curiosity diminishes. Questioning becomes rarer, and without realizing it, you begin to operate on autopilot, believing you are simply being prudent. This is how micro mistakes arise, not as glaring failures, but as small daily concessions. An opportunity you ignore because it seems to require too much energy. An important decision that you postpone because it's not urgent now. An investment that no longer makes sense, but is maintained out of comfort, habit, or familiarity. None of this generates immediate pain. None of this triggers a clear alarm. And that's precisely why it all seems safe. There's a hidden truth here that almost no one likes to face. Prolonged stability without active reflection breeds complacency. And complacency isn't laziness, nor is it a lack of ability. Often, it's the side effect of having been right long enough to start relying too much on one's current state. People don't make mistakes because they're reckless, but because they stop reviewing. You don't lose money because you take excessive risks, but because you stop questioning whether you're still playing the right game. Behind the scenes, this constant tranquility silently shapes decisions. The impact doesn't appear in weeks or months, but accumulates over the course of the journey. Growth slows. The long-term vision becomes less clear, and when the person realizes that something has stagnated, they can no longer pinpoint exactly where they began to stray from the original intention. Everything seemed logical, everything seemed calm, everything seemed under control. And that's why so many people get stuck right here. Not for lack of intelligence, discipline, or information, but for an excess of tranquility. Because the game changes when the pain disappears, and those who don't learn to replace this natural discomfort with conscious attention end up being guided by inertia. Calmness, when not accompanied by clarity, creates the illusion of security, while small decisions are pushed to automatic mode. This phase demands a different kind of mental presence. A more honest look at one's own choices. A willingness to question even when nothing seems wrong. Because it is in this comfortable silence that the greatest revelations and the greatest deviations begin to take shape, preparing the ground for a scenario that almost no one notices while still feeling protected. If this describes something you felt or observed in your own journey, comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this is exactly where the concept of the shark door comes in. After 250K, you're no longer in the same mental, emotional, and strategic environment as before. The scenario changes, even if nothing external seems different. The rules become more subtle, the signs less obvious, and the consequences take longer to appear. It's like walking through an invisible door and entering a space where mistakes don't shout. They whisper. Before that point, the game is clear. Earn more, get out of trouble, grow, accumulate. The impact of decisions is quick. One mistake hurts. One success pushes you forward. But after 250K, the game stops being about speed and becomes about direction. Losses don't come as sudden falls. They come as slow erosion. Small, seemingly harmless decisions begin to have an enormous accumulated weight throughout the journey. And the most dangerous thing is that everything continues to seem stable while this is happening. That's why many people cross that threshold without realizing it. They continue making decisions as if they were still playing the old game, where the main risk was not growing fast enough. But now the real risk is different. Complacency. Maintaining strategies out of habit. Repeating decisions because they've always worked. Over-relying on current comfort. Playing the old game on a new board creates a silent distortion, and its impact only becomes apparent after too much time has passed. The Shark Gate isn't about losing everything. It's about losing precision. It's about failing to see nuances. It's about continuing to do just enough when the environment demands refined attention. At this stage, those who grow aren't the ones who run the fastest, but those who perceive the most, those who adjust sooner, those who understand that stability doesn't mean immobility. The transformation required here isn't financial, it's mental. It's about learning to operate without the push of pain, without constant fear, without external pressure. And that requires a maturity that few consciously develop. Behind the scenes, what separates those who advance from those who stagnate is not access to information, but internal attitude towards their own decisions. The game becomes about avoiding complacency disguised as prudence, avoiding confusing calmness with dominance, avoiding treating comfort as a sign that questioning is no longer necessary. Because after 250K, the biggest mistake isn't making a big mistake. It's stopping the fine-tuning. This is the great revelation of this new environment. You can be technically secure and strategically vulnerable at the same time. And those who don't perceive this change begin to pay an invisible price, diluted over time, difficult to trace. It's not a collapse. It's a slow departure from maximum potential. It's the feeling of being busy, stable, calm, but standing still. If this describes something you've already noticed or started to feel, comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because after crossing the Shark Gate, the real difference ceases to be how much you accumulate and becomes how you perceive it. It's not about returning to anxiety, nor about reclaiming that constant state of alertness that drained energy at the beginning of the journey. It's about something more sophisticated, active attention, a type of presence that doesn't depend on pain, fear, or urgency to function. When money brings comfort, the mind tends to seek rest. That's natural, but rest cannot turn into detachment. Passive calm is when everything seems fine, and therefore, nothing is questioned. Active attention is the opposite of that. It's being calm and yet curious. It's feeling stable and at the same time, keeping the mind sharp for small decisions that have a big impact in the long term. It's exchanging automatic impulse for conscious choice. This change requires an internal transformation. It's not about speeding up. It's about seeing things more clearly. The next level doesn't demand haste. It demands clarity. It demands the ability to look at a comfortable decision and ask, does this still make sense today? It demands the courage to revise something that only works okay, even when there's no pushing pain. Behind the scenes, those who advance are the ones who maintain the habit of thinking clearly when everything seems too quiet. The hidden truth is that comfort can be a great ally or a terrible guide. It can offer space for more strategic decisions, or it can encourage lazy choices. The difference lies in mental attitude. Active attention means observing pattern, noticing subtle deviations, adjusting course before the impact accumulates. It means understanding that stability does not eliminate the need for reflection. It only changes the type of reflection required. Those who cross the shark gate need to exchange automatic tranquility for deliberate clarity. It's not about living in tension, it's about living awake. It's not about distrusting everything, it's about questioning enough. It's about recognizing that the game has changed and that now the most important decisions don't come with alarm bells. They appear as simple, repeated, seemingly harmless choices. And that's precisely where conscious attention makes all the difference. Throughout this journey, the mind that thrives is the one that learns to sustain focus without urgency, curiosity without anxiety, and strategy without rigidity. It's a rare state built with intention. And when that intention solidifies, comfort ceases to be a risk and becomes a tool. From there, clarity begins to guide decisions in a different way, opening space for fine adjustments that almost no one notices while they are still too busy to observe. If this resonates with what you're going through right now, leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because this conversation has truly stayed with you until the end. And when that happens, it's not about numbers or isolated strategies, it's about seeing the game more clearly. If this kind of reflection helps you make better decisions throughout your journey, subscribing to the channel is simply a way to continue this dialogue. Here, the focus is precisely this: thinking more clearly where almost everyone else relaxes too much. If you want, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me." This shows me that you stayed until the end and helps keep this space alive with people who are truly seeking awareness, not just shortcuts. And if this conversation resonated with you, a like is a simple way to signal that connection and help this content reach more people who are going through exactly the same point in their journey. Now, there's a video here that complements everything we've discussed, further deepens this mindset shift, and fits perfectly with what you just heard. Click and continue watching it.